So, Roz, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I actually always like to start with like what got you into this? Why why are you so passionate about this? Why is this your work?
Yeah, wow. And there's so many answers to that, but I think what I will say, and you may get this a lot, is I never had a big problem talking about sexuality, right? I never understood the big deal with why people are uncomfortable talking about it. And so people naturally tend to talk to me about it because I'm not, I'm comfortable.
Right.
And that got me into education. I also started in prevention work really young. So, like, before I was even 20, I was doing, drug and alcohol prevention and then, safer sex, early pregnancy, STI prevention. And of course, so way back when, I started as a health educator. And I just find that sex is the thing that people know the least about when it comes to health. Not that health is the only aspect of sexuality, but,
Right, right.
you know, I mean,
Okay.
there's more to it, but that's the sort of
Right, but that
elevator.
sort of found your way there. So you
Yeah.
spent a long time teaching professionals, right? Or teaching.
Yeah, that's the main thing that I do. And I do, of course, do courses and webinars and in-person classes and workshops for anybody, which is fun. I find that really fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, my main work is teaching educators, counselors, clinicians, etc.
Okay. So talk to me a little bit about the shift now to working more directly with the general public and, broadening that reach or that impact. Like I don't know, I'd be curious where it came from and how that evolved and what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you. So, I think this is kind of a little bit of a pattern for me, but I think if you get too far away from sort of the front line, if you will, right, the frontline education efforts, you sort of lose touch with what the general public is, concerned with. I don't feel too much like that's an issue because I supervise people who are doing this all the time. And of course, people in my life, but it's still a thing. And the other thing is that I just want to teach the stuff now, not teach how to teach the stuff, right?
Okay.
So, and one of the big impetus is that over the last, I would say, 10 to 15 years, I just keep hearing more and more disturbing things about people's inability to be intimate because it's simply a lack of skills. It's a lack of a skill set,
Hmm.
and when I grew up, it was sort of 80s, 90s, and everything was like self-help, and everyone was going to therapists, and everybody knew all this. And then somehow it went way out. It was like not cool to be into self-help, right? I don't know why, but it just went out. And so this entire skill set for how to talk to people, communication skills, not just with an intimate partner, but with anyone,
Hmm.
that kind of went by the wayside. And then, of course, at the same time, internet, right? So
Yeah, I
now
was
we
going to
have,
say, with all this technology and electronic communication and all this online, I know young people and their friends are all online. They've never even met in person. Like there's such a huge jump here.
yeah. And I think what has suffered is some of that human interaction face to face. And what has suffered is the ability to know what intimacy even is, right? So I'll tell you the shocker for me was when I started talking to some young people in their 20s and they were complaining that, one of them was complaining, well, the guy kept looking me in the eye during sex. And that was so creepy. And I thought, whoa, creepy. Like, what a flip, right? When I
Yeah,
was young, like if he didn't look you in the eye, that was creepy. You would
yeah,
feel like you
yeah.
were just being used. And all of a sudden there's this anything too intimate is considered creepy, and sex is seen as much more transactional, much more like, I just want to get mine, you get yours. We'll figure out how to do it like a game that you play together. And even though that's fine, like there's nothing wrong with gamified sex, if you will,
Right.
right? There's nothing wrong with sex totally for pleasure. I think the capacity has to be built for further than that so that when you
Hmm.
want to be intimate with someone, you have those skills, right? So that's kind of that was
So,
one of the big things.
so when you say it's a skill set, what kind of skills? Like I don't know if you can list them exhaustively, but like what
Right.
what really comes to mind in terms of skills around this? Because I don't think you're talking about sexual technique, right? It's not
No,
like how to give a
no,
blowjob or something like that, right? Like
right.
what are these skills you're referring to?
So it's funny, right? Because a lot of them are simple things like openness, and then boundaries, right? Honesty. So, and these are things that we've been taught by the internet not to be, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Show what you want people to see, show an image, because what people forget is that social media is literally entertainment,
yeah,
right? That's what it is. I mean, yes, it connects people, but we're connecting only the visual parts of ourselves. And we're connecting only the parts of ourselves that we want people to see. So they don't get to see the parts that we don't want them to see, right?
yeah.
And so how do we do that? How do we show people the parts that we don't think are so great? How do we tell them about, this is something I'm not very good at, or this is something I'm ashamed of, or this is something I'm scared of, this is something I'm embarrassed about, without, again, but having appropriate boundaries so we're not risking extra far, right?
Right.
So one of the things I talk about in my workshops is that there are different levels of intimacy. There are 5 levels of intimacy. And the first one is just facts, right? I know what do we know? So classic low level intimacy is like, let's talk about the weather. Let's talk about what the sports team did the other day, right? Because it's facts. There's no risk in that, or very, very little, right?
Yeah.
Unless somebody hates your sports team,
Right, right,
right?
right.
Then you
Right.
might risk a fight. Who
They're from
knows?
Green Bay and I'm from Chicago. That's gonna be a problem, right?
It
Yeah.
could be. Yeah, yeah. Um, so that's facts. And then the second level is an opinion about something, which is a slightly different risk. And of course, we're not talking about opinions about hot button topics. We're just talking about any opinion.
Okay.
What do I think, right? So, what do I know? That's just a fact. And then the second level is what do I think about something? And that's a little bit of a risk because if you have an opinion about something, somebody might disagree,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then the third level is I feel. So,
Mm-hmm.
how do I feel about something? What are my feelings today? So if I say to you, hey, Jessa, how are you doing today? And most of the time people just say, I'm fine.
I'm fine. Right.
But if you were to say to me, man, no, I'm not great today, that would be a risk of you telling me how you
Right.
felt. And that's that
Right.
level 3 intimacy.
Okay.
Um, Level 4 is, and also that could be about issues, right? That could be about how I feel about politics, how I feel about other things. It's not necessarily inviting you into that, although you might do that. It's more like, how do I feel about this?
Yeah.
But level 4 is, how do I feel about you? How do I feel
Ah,
about us,
yeah.
right? Our relationship. And that's where it gets really scary for a lot of people. And then level 5 is trust. If we do this and we get through these levels, there has been a willingness to risk along the way. And we've risked a little bit in that order, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
right? Then I begin to trust you. And I think trust is one of those words that people really misuse. People will say, I just knew I could trust you the minute I met you. And that's not accurate, right?
Right, right, right. You have to have
Right.
lived experience together. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what's accurate is you might feel willing to risk with that person for some reason. That person makes you feel comfortable and you then feel willing to risk, but it doesn't mean you actually trust them. Trust
Yeah.
is earned.
Yeah.
So nowadays, what goes wrong is that if I tell you how I feel about something and it's a hot button issue, right? And I'm doing it on the internet or wherever I'm doing it, let me talk about politics, right? That's the big one, right?
Yes, at the moment.
Yeah, now we've gone immediately to level 4. It's
Mm.
not a level 3 thing. People now feel like, oh, you like so and so as a politician, or you're on this side, then I know how I feel about you.
Yeah.
I already know. And we're leaping over all of this, these skills that we need and the risks that we need to take incrementally all the way up to I know how I feel about you immediately. We might even start at level 2 and just give an opinion about a policy. And now we're immediately at level 4. I know
Huh.
exactly how I feel about you because of that opinion. So the workshops are really about how do we back that up and go a little bit more in order where
Yeah.
we're learning how to have a relationship with somebody before we form an opinion about what a jerk they are
Right,
or
right.
how amazing they are.
When you were talking about the levels, I was half expecting you to say Here's what I think, here's what I feel, here's what I want. Does that
Right.
fit in there somewhere? Or is that like extraneous? I don't know. That's
I think
because that's
so.
also risky.
Yeah, I love that. I think that a want would fit into level three
Hmm.
and like emotions. How do I feel? Well, I feel like I want this from you. Well, I feel like I want this. But then level four is here's what I want from you,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Which is
yeah, yeah.
really risky,
Right,
right?
right,
Hmm.
right. The other thing, I mean, maybe this is an aside and we don't have to go here, but when I talk to clients, I think a lot of people hesitate to take these risks without having the trust, but it's through the risks that we get to the trust, right? Like I talk
That's
to
right.
clients about we have to actually make ourselves safe. We can't be dependent on how someone's going to respond to us. Like now, whether we stay in a relationship might depend on how trustworthy they are, right? But
Exactly. And trust comes from that trustworthiness, right?
mhm.
So one of the things that I teach my educators, right, my sex educators, is I talk to them about graduated risk and building graduated risk into their workshops, their webinars, their whatever they're doing. Because sex educators, we tend to be so we our scale of what we're comfortable with is far beyond most people's scale of comfort, right? And so they'll leap into an exercise that your average person is not comfortable with at all. And so I talk to them about, and it depends on your audience, you know.
Right,
You,
right,
if your audience is a kink club and you already know half the people, then you're fine, right? You know
right,
where
right.
they're comfortable. But there tends to be a leaping in too deeply at first. So we talk about graduated risk and then of course allowing people to take their own risks. And this is true in relationship as well, right? Just because I tell you what happened to me when I was 4 and that's a big risk for me, I can't then expect you to just all of a sudden respond in kind. It's not
Right.
fair. You could, but might not be your time to do it. You might need a
Hmm.
little more time. You might need to know me a little bit better.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. So you talk about this concept of embodied receiving. Do we need to bridge to that? I don't want to just leap to like a whole different thing, but like, where does that fall in with this conversation about risk and trust and
Yeah.
intimacy too?
So I think where it falls in, Jessa, is it falls into intimacy begins with me knowing me, right? And so embodied receiving is really about learning how to tune into our bodies to know how we feel about something. And it is always surprising to me, even though it shouldn't be, right? It should not be by now, but it still surprises me often how little we are in touch with our bodies. And there are
Mm,
reasons for that. We are not taught to be in touch with our bodies. As a matter of fact, we are taught and programmed the exact opposite, right? No matter how good you feel, doesn't matter because it's really about how you look, right?
mm,
Or ignore that discomfort, go ahead and wear those high heels, even though they're killing you, like whatever it is, we are constantly being taught, starve yourself so you're skinny, whatever it is, we are constantly being taught just ignore how your body feels, it's not
mm,
important from very young. And I might add that boys and people who are socialized as men get that much worse, right?
mm.
Because they are taught just ignore any feeling whatsoever, or you're not a boy, you're not a man,
Yeah.
right? So, and then we wonder why certain behaviors happen in certain genders, right? But having said that, we are completely out of touch with our bodies. Most people are very out of touch. Some people are, there's a scale, of course. And so we have to learn how to get back in touch. And some of that is very simply just sitting and going, okay, how do I feel right now? Where do I feel it in my body? You know, and then not assigning meaning to it necessarily,
Mm,
not being like, I'm turned on. What does that mean? Maybe you're just turned on. Like, can't that be okay? Well, I'm in this room full of people. That's okay. You don't have to do anything with it. You don't have to, I always say just because you're turned on doesn't mean you have to point it at anybody,
right,
right?
right, right.
So there's a knowing of ourselves and how we feel. And that's extremely important for intimacy because if I know nothing about me, then I'm really not going to know much about you either.
Hmm.
I'm going to assume a lot of things that are based on what other people tell me I should be feeling or thinking, as opposed to my own experience of how I experience my life. So, embodied receiving is really how to turn the senses back on, you know, and that takes time. Luckily, though, it's pretty pleasurable to practice.
Right, right. I'm just thinking about, where do you feel that in your body? And I think that's become somewhat of a cliche. The people that aren't
Yeah.
in touch with their body, it's like, oh my God, roll their eyes. Where do I feel that my body is so stupid? And
Yeah.
I hope people really hear the invitation in that to like connect with themselves in a powerful way, because it does connect to pleasure and intimacy and everything
It
else.
does. It does. And thank you for pointing that out because you're absolutely right. I mean, it sounds like a hippy dippy woo woo thing. And
Yeah,
it has been co-opted into a lot of communities, but it doesn't make it any less powerful or important.
right, right, right. All right. So how do you teach embodied receiving? Or like is it, I guess this is part of your workshops, right? That one of the concepts that you're working with?
Yeah. So I have a set of workshops called the Deep Yes. And the Deep Yes was a set of workshops. And then I realized I had so much to say about it. I needed to write a book. So I wrote a book, right? It's called The Deep Yes, The
Okay.
Lost Art of True Receiving. And now I'm going back to the workshops, right? Because how can you, there's only so much a book can teach you, right?
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so how do you practice this? So there are all different ways of waking up the senses, and some of them you can practice alone, and some of them you can practice with one other person, and some of them you can practice in a room full of people. And that also brings you the opportunity to practice knowing that no matter what you're feeling, it's yours. It doesn't belong
Hmm.
to anybody else. It's nobody else's business. And that includes sexual arousal, right? If I'm really turned on in a room full of people, no one has to know.
Hmm.
No one has to know. Um, and that's important. And I don't have to do anything about it. I can simply breathe it in and enjoy that feeling without doing a thing about it, without imagining what I could do with it. That's mine. I can feel that pleasure on my own, right?
Hmm.
Just the arousal, not doing anything about it. So that's one thing. But even if we're not talking about sexual arousal, just the sensual arousal, just the picking up of the senses, back in the like 80s, I think it was the 80s, maybe it was the early 90s, there were these books which are out of print. I've tried to get a hold of them and to
Oh,
see if they were as good as I remember, but they were called The Sensuous Woman and the Sensuous Man, and
wow.
forgive the gender binary there.
Right, right.
Sorry about that. This was a long time ago. However, they were really great. And what they were really teaching in some ways was like almost like a sensate focus, right? Like how do you wake up the body and one of the key ways to doing that is slowing everything down. So some of the things that we teach are how to slow things down and then just feel like, is this comfortable for me? Is it really uncomfortable for me? If it's super uncomfortable, why? So sometimes people will say things like, this is boring, right? And that usually is because they've been so overstimulated
Hmm.
that there's no scale for them. The scale is just way off the charts the other way.
Right.
But when you get people to actually attend, you could call it mindfulness. I really don't like that word because I find that it's kind of the opposite of what you're doing. You're losing your mind when you're
Mm.
embodied. You're not thinking, you're feeling,
Yeah.
you know. So there's a lot of slowing down, there's a lot of noticing, and then there's discussing what was that like, you know. Most people absolutely love it. It's not, when I say some people may think it's boring, that is, I think, mostly the reactions of people who haven't tried the exercise. They just look at the exercise or read the exercise and think that's not something I need to do. That looks boring. That sounds boring. But when you actually do it, it's fascinating. If
Mm.
you take in an embodied receiving of the entirety of someone else's face in every small detail, it is fascinating. You can
Mm.
see things in every square half inch, and you can see them in a way that you've never seen them before. You see beauty where you haven't seen it before. you see humanity for what it is, as opposed to trying, your head being programmed to make someone look like an image that you've seen over and over again,
Yeah.
created by people who are trying to sell something.
It also sounds like, I mean, it sounds sort of like we're waking up out of a trance. We're going along on autopilot, you know, without
Yeah,
thought, without real awareness and slowing down to be like, wake up to what's actually in front of us or
I
what's
think
actually
so.
happening, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think so. It really is an awakening because we have to numb ourselves really hardcore to live in this culture, or at least we don't have to, but it's often one of the easiest or most common ways to sort of cope with all of the barrage of want coming at us. The very first time I went to Italy was in 2005, I think. And I was more relaxed there than I'd ever been in my life. And
Mm.
granted, like some of it was, yes, I'm on vacation. Yes, it was a beautiful setting. It's gorgeous. The language, the food, of course. But what I realized somewhere around, day 7 into this 2-week trip was I saw a very small sort of ad, if you will, on the front of a bench, like a bus bench.
Hmm.
And it really struck me. That was the first ad I'd seen all week, like
Oh,
since I
wow.
left Rome. And I thought, and even in Rome, there just weren't a lot of ads, right? And I thought, I wonder how much pressure this puts on me every day without me realizing it, this subconscious pressure to buy,
Yeah. Don't you
you
want this? Don't you
need
have
this
this
thing.
problem? Isn't this wrong? Yeah.
Yes,
Wow.
you need this. You need. And whenever you get something some unconscious thing saying you need this, then you feel like there is something wrong with you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And with that pressure gone, your whole body relaxes.
Hmm.
So living in this culture, even just walking around, right? Unless you're in the middle of a national park or a state park or something, there's always this constant pressure that you don't have what you need, didn't you know? And we
Yeah.
we'd be happy to sell it to you.
Right.
So,
So how do you define deep yes? Like, I mean, I know
mm,
they're two very straightforward words. They make sense together, but I'm just
right,
curious how you would speak to like what is this? What is this experience and what's its value? What's its purpose?
right. Want to practice?
Sure.
Do you want to practice? Okay, I'm sorry. I put you on the spot. You can
No,
say
no,
no.
that's fine.
Okay. I think that you are a beautiful, beautiful woman.
So it's whether I can receive that. Is that
What
the
happened in your
practice?
body when I said that?
A softening.
Okay.
Yeah.
I saw
Um,
you kind of catch your breath and hold it a little bit. Am I right about that?
I maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
It's hard on Zoom, right?
Right. Well, and it's already passed, right? So yeah.
Right. Yeah. So most people have an automatic defense against that, no matter what they look like,
Mm.
right? No matter what they look like. And I do believe you're a very beautiful person. Um, so there's like a almost an energetic barrier, if you will, that we put sort of a few inches from our body where we keep it out, you know. I say, wow, you're so smart, or wow, you're amazing, or wow, you're so beautiful, or just, something that for whatever reason is hard for you to accept.
Hmm.
And let's put a name on that reason, which is capitalism, right? And patriarchy and all the other things, white supremacy and all those things, right? Um, but we keep it out just a few inches from ourselves,
Yeah.
like, and a lot of people will go, oh, no, look at, I'm a mess, my hair's a mess. And so, all that, right? What I teach is I teach people to notice, okay, where is the barrier? Is it right here? Is it, for me, when I do it, it's just a few inches out. Sometimes it's
Hmm.
even further, but I can literally feel like almost like a wall between me and that person that I put up. Like, no, 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 no. You don't really know. I can't accept that. Like somehow that I can't accept that, right? Um, so that's just a compliment.
Hmm.
So we can start there and go, okay, how does that feel? What happens in your body? Did you hold your breath? Did you, you know, start denying? What happens when you really take it in? What would that
Yeah.
feel like physically, right? So the embodied receiving, what would that feel like? And people will often go, okay, right? So now there's a deep breath going on. And as cliche as that sounds, it really helps us to take in.
Mm,
But there are lots of different ways that people will receive, and some of it is very individual. So, working with people one on one, what I might do is say, figure out, are they a more visual person, a more auditory person, kinesthetic person? How do they express themselves? And some of them might say, oh, I can't see that. Right. And then you kind of get a hint, okay, this person may be more visual. And you can say, can you visualize taking this compliment in? What does that look like to you?
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. If they're more kinesthetic, you could say, what would it feel like to really let that compliment just sort of come into you and sit well? What would that feel like? And you don't tell them how to do it because I might tell you a way that doesn't work for you.
Right.
And but there are certain practices in workshops that work for most people that we practice when we do a deep yes.
Okay. So a DPS is about receiving, like
Yes,
letting all the way in and I assume
yes.
something you want, right? Something that feels good ultimately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we practice with all the senses just because people have different senses that they prefer. So we practice how to receive touch, and then we have a whole menu of what kind of touch you can receive. And that, of course, is optional, right? No one has to touch anyone. None of it is sexual, right?
Right.
It's sensual touch. There's no genitals involved. There's no scary areas involved. But
Right.
but if you start on a non-scary area, like maybe the this part of your arm, right? This on inside of your arm. That's usually feels really nice to people. Doesn't particularly feel very sexual. It's not near your chest. It's not near your genitals or anything. So you might start there. You might start on the back. But how to receive touch, and then you give them a menu of things that, you want to try this, you want to try that, you want to try this, you want to try that. And they can always say, no, I don't want to try any of that. And then you give them a meaningful alternative, not just like, okay, you can observe. I mean, no,
You could watch everybody else having this experience internally. Right.
no. Yeah, you
Right.
got to have other options for them. And then how to take in tastes, right? So we have a whole bunch of activities for that. How to take in smell or scent. And there are really fun activities we have for that. But it brings you into your body, and then like, okay, what does that feel like? We use a lot of blindfolds, which again are always optional. People don't have to
Right.
use a
Right.
blindfold if it freaks them out. Um, And we try and do things in small groups or dyads, and sometimes we use triads because if you're in a group of a bunch of people you don't know and you get thrown in with somebody you don't know into a dyadic situation, it's nice to actually have three instead of two because then
Yeah.
that way you feel like, okay, one person's just going to observe and then you switch roles and then that feels safer to people.
Right. Everybody gets a little bit of a pause or something like that.
Right.
And why? I mean, it seems so evident this needs to be in person instead of online, but
Mhm.
do you want to speak to the importance of doing this live and taking that, what might seem like a risk to people to show up and do this in person versus I'm just going to watch a webinar.
Yeah. Well, we do both, right? Of
Yeah.
course. I mean, we have all kinds of webinars, that you can watch. We have over 100 webinars at the Institute. Um, and I don't even know if I talked about the Institute yet, but
Oh, we will
yeah,
at the end. I'll ask
yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but in person, of course, you can practice in a physically embodied way, right? You can physically practice with someone else. And while that might be scarier, if you have the right leader, and I'm going to go ahead and like give myself a little credit here and just say, I know how to do this, right? If
Hmm.
you have the right leader that brings you through in a way where you always know you have a choice. And I remind people through every single activity, they get to sit it out. They get to modify it if they want. They get to, and I also help people understand that if somebody decides that they want to sit it out when you're doing an activity with them. What they are doing is practicing their no, and that's really good, right? They're practicing their boundaries. It's not about you, it's about them. And so when people say, no, I'm going to sit this out, we say, thank you for letting me know. I don't want to do anything with someone that doesn't want to do it. That would be awful, right? So we learn all of those skills. But um, a lot of it is how is the workshop crafted so that people can very slowly decide whether or not they want to risk in that graduated risk. And then no matter how far into the workshop we are, I'm always going to remind you, you still have a choice. You still have a choice. You still have a choice. Some of you are going to be overwhelmed, right? The introverts in the room, they're going to be full way quicker than the extroverts,
Yeah.
right? And it's okay if like halfway through the workshop you feel pretty done and everything you do after that is more like observational or something along those lines or more discussion. That's fine, right?
Yeah.
So some of it is, feeling safe in the room, the container. And some of it is just, hey, when we do this in person, we get so much more out of it than we could in online because of the subject matter.
Right.
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 But I do. I mean, we do workshops. I do workshops online for couples, and they can turn off their video and they can practice the thing in the background. And then they come back to the larger group on the Zoom just to discuss what was that like for you? What did that
Hmm.
feel like? What came up for you, etc. But it's not quite the same. The other advantage, and this is a really big advantage that people don't, I think, give it credit for or they don't realize it's something they don't realize will happen is when you go through a workshop like that in person, the whole community feels safer. The
Hmm.
people that you're with in that room become a community as the day goes on,
Yes.
as the workshop goes on. And the last time I taught this workshop, and then that becomes this really big bonus that you didn't even know was going to happen because now you feel really safe. It's not just some teacher on a Zoom, and it's not just your partner. Now it's a whole room full of people that have gone through the same experience and they have had the same experience and they are feeling closer to you, right? Um, that's huge.
Yeah.
And so the last time I taught the workshop was in Phoenix, and we had, 2.5 hours or something like that. And we said, "Hey, thanks everybody" at the end, and we were shutting it down. We had to turn off the lights because people wouldn't leave, right?
Yeah. Move to the restaurant now or the bar or
Yeah.
something, yeah.
And then we turned off the lights and we cleaned up and we put everything in the car and they were out in the parking lot
Right.
talking. So that's a really big advantage. You might meet people that you might want to talk to later, but even if you don't ever see those people again, the experience of feeling safe in a group, in a community is very, very powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. It is a little bit of a turn, but you made a distinction between sexual and sensual, but you also make a distinction between sexual and erotic,
Right.
right? I wanted to give you a chance to talk to that. I don't know if that applies in the workshop conversation or not, if this is just something for people to understand
Yeah, sure. Thank you so
intimacy
much
in
for that.
general.
Yeah, no, thanks. Um, in a way, there is no difference, right? And in a way, there is. I think a lot of it has to do with our intention and our energy. If our intention is to have genital contact eventually, and the only reason that we're being sensual, if you will, is to get to that genital contact or that orgasm, right? Then it's sexual the whole way through for you, if
Yeah.
that's your intention. Even if you don't get to do that with that person, it's still a
Right.
sexual act for you because that's where your energy's at, right? And that's what your attention is. Um, so in a way, it's artificial to say this is sensual, this is sexual,
Right.
right?
Right. Right. Right.
On the other hand, when it comes to the erotic versus the sexual, there's this concept. Most people put the erotic inside of the sexual, and the erotic is any pleasure of the body, right?
Mm.
So in their minds, the erotic is automatically sexual.
Hmm.
And that's problematic, right? So when people do things like say, oh, this ice cream is orgasmic, right? It's funny. We laugh at that, right? What we really mean is that this is extremely physically pleasurable to eat this particular kind of ice cream right now. And the problem with calling it orgasmic or seeing it that way, it's actually not a problem. It's emblematic, right? It's
Yeah.
illustrative of the bigger problem, which is that we think anything that's that pleasurable must somehow be sexual and therefore must be bad, right?
Ah,
Must be something I shouldn't be doing somehow. And so there's this uh either I'm being naughty, right? I was so bad today I had that ice
right.
cream,
Yeah.
right? Or oh, I'm ashamed. I'm
Mm,
ashamed. And so because we put the sexual inside of the erotic inside the sexual instead of the other way around, all kinds of pleasures of the body can be forbidden to us
mm.
if we have a lot of sexual shame and if that's been given to us, right?
Well, I was going to
So,
say those have been linked for a long time, right? In terms of
yes,
you shouldn't have pleasure at all.
no, this is
Yeah.
ancient. This goes back to Plato. It really,
Yeah.
damn Plato.
Yeah.
You know, and so the idea that the body is somehow lower than the mind and the mind is like elevated and this is where we want to go and they're totally linked, right? But
Yeah.
that artificial split happened a long time ago, and part of what sex educators have to do is help people to learn that the split is even there and then help them decide, do they want to do something to heal it, because
Yeah.
not everybody does. But if you flip it around and you say, okay, guess what, in fact, the sexual is inside the erotic, not the other way around. You can have erotic pleasure. You can be fully alive in your body and feel fabulous. And that doesn't have to be a sexual thing. There's nothing shameful about it. There's nothing naughty about it. It's not inappropriate in any circumstance, you know? I can eat a pear and be like, "Oh, this is so incredible," right? And why is that inappropriate? Because
Yeah.
people go, she shouldn't be having that much pleasure. That's just a little weird.
Yeah. Yeah. Nobody should
But
like a
that's
pear
because
that
we
much.
flip
Yeah.
those things.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
So we
All
need to
right.
flip it back the other way around.
So share about the Institute, the workshops. Like, what do you have available? Where do people go to find out about it?
Yeah, thank you. So it's instituteforsexuality.com is the website. The institute is Institute for Sex Education and Enlightenment, right? So there's that sort of almost spiritual piece to it that we kind of mind, body, spirit is the way I call it.
Yeah.
Um, Most of what we do, as I said before, is professional training, but we have a lot of these workshops. And that right on the homepage now, you can find the in-person workshops if you're interested, or you can go to some of our streaming classes, recorded webinars. It's all on there. The website is just full of things that people can do. But right on the homepage is the Intimacy Experiment, which is our new set of workshops that we're doing in person. Right now, we have one on deck for Oakland, California, and one on deck for San Antonio, Texas. But we have them coming up in New York and Michigan. I don't know, several spots people can
Yeah.
inquire.
Okay. And I assume there's a way to get on a mailing list or something and be kept up to date about the new
Yes, right on the
openings coming.
homepage.
Okay.
Sign
I'll
up
make
for our
sure to,
newsletter.
I'll link that on the in the show notes.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you so
Well, thank
much.
you so much.
Yeah, this was just delightful. I really so honored to be here.